Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan. Today is 6 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, and I want to talk to you about this war, which is rapidly becoming another one of those never-ending wars. This war has caused global disruption and terrible loss of blood and treasure all around. Ukrainians obviously have suffered the most. There are, by some estimates, that nearly 5,700 civilians have died in Ukraine. This is a UN estimate, but the UN also acknowledges that this might be an estimate on the lower side. There is also the estimate that nearly 9,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed. 20% of its territory is now under Russian control. Many of its cities have been fully devastated and are also under occupation by the Russians. Nearly 1/4 of the Ukrainian population has been displaced. Nearly 6 million Ukrainians have crossed border and are now refugees, mostly in Europe. So from a Ukrainian perspective, this has been a devastating blow to its economy, to the state of its developments, to its population. For the Russians too, it has not been easy going. Its economy is suffering significantly from all the sanctions that were imposed. It has now been cut off from the West. It is more or less marginalized from the global economy. There are estimates that nearly 25,000 of Russian soldiers have been killed. It has the highest inflation in Europe, and it is quite possible that Russian economy will show signs of devastation in the future more than it is right now. So the chances that Russia will recover, economically speaking, from this adventure is unlikely for several years unless it gets help from West or from China. For the rest of the world too, this war has been quite devastating. It has created food insecurity. People have reached the point of starvation in many parts of the world. It has caused inflation all over the world. So generally, pain has been felt all around as a result of this Russian invasion of Ukraine. In this conversation, I intend to identify, I don't know how to call them, 5 trends, 5 consequences, 5 patterns that I see emerging from this war which is rapidly becoming an unending war. Number 1, I don't think this war is going to end anytime soon. In fact, it is in the Russian interest to prolong this war and take it into the winter. Most analysts feel that the winter is going to be extremely severe because there is no access to cheap Russian gas and energy and oil for most of the European countries. So they will be suffering from a winter in which they will see power cuts. And that pain Russia expects may divide Europeans, and so this unified opposition that Russia has been facing from Europe and the West may begin to crack as the winter becomes more and more severe. So it is in the Russian interest to prolong this war into the winter, and so it's quite possible that even in 2023 this war will still be going on. As far as the West is concerned, while they would like to see a quick victory for Ukraine, there has been no attempts, especially by the United States, to initiate a pathway to a peaceful resolution of this war. There is nothing out there that I can point to say, look, there is an attempt to create some kind of a ceasefire, some kind of a negotiated settlement. So the United States, I guess, is willing to continue with this war as long as the Ukrainians are willing to fight. Number 2, the second thing that I can understand from the politics and geopolitics that is taking place is that this is indeed a war of expansion. The conventional understanding in the West is that this is a war of expansion. Putin wants to create a legacy for himself. He wants to restore the past Russian Empire, and so he wants to literally expand territorially outwards to include Ukraine and possibly other countries, those in the Baltics, etc., to restore the territorial greatness of the Russian Empire as it was perhaps before World War I. And so in the West, this Russian invasion of Ukraine is cast as an unprovoked war of expansion. Putin, on the other hand, argues that he's defending Russia from Western expansion, NATO's eastward expansion. While NATO and NATO countries deny that, we must remember that NATO has indeed expanded eastward consistently since the end of the Cold War. And if the original purpose of NATO was to defend Europe from Soviet Union, then what is NATO doing in Afghanistan? What was it doing in Iraq? And what was it doing in Libya? So NATO has even self-consciously gone global. So there is some truth in what Putin says, that he sees an expansionist NATO. And the fact that the United States has not sought an alternative pathway to peace and is hoping to defeat Russia in this war, to me is clear indication that this is also about American and Western hegemony. This is about expanding Western hegemony eastward into Eastern Europe as deep as possible. And in many ways, those goals are being achieved with the inclusion of both Sweden and Finland, who are now going to join NATO. So you can see that NATO has also expanded. And as I already pointed out, Ukraine also sees an opportunity to defeat Russia with the help of American weapons and Western support, and also wishes to expand all the way to the pre-2014 borders. Essentially, the point is that Ukraine now wants Crimea back. So in many ways, you could argue that this is a war of expansion for every major player in the game. The third pattern that I have observed is, like every major global event, especially wars, there have been tremendous unintended consequences. The key unintended consequences of this war, which nobody had anticipated even before the war began, is essentially the weaponization of institutions of globalization, such as SWIFT and other banking arrangements. What this has done is it has scared many other countries that everything that they thought, especially in terms of institutions and practices which were created to generate global peace and integrate the world, are essentially potentially instruments that can be weaponized in the interests of the West. So, for example, I don't think you could have weaponized SWIFT to advance India's interests against Pakistan or against China, but you can definitely weaponize SWIFT to advance Ukrainian interests against Russia. This realization in the world. And the other part is that given the fact that both Ukraine and Russia are so integral to the food security of the planet itself, this war has created tremendous food insecurities, especially in Africa. And this has compelled every nation to think of globalization differently, think of their dependencies and their supply chains in a new way. They're looking for more reliable partners. They're looking for partners who are nearby. And so we see the emergence of new linkages. So, for example, you see India becoming suddenly a major exporter of grain to Africa, taking over from where Ukraine and Russia used to do. So this is an important development, and I think one of the unintended consequences will be deglobalization or reconfiguration of globalization in terms of fragmented spheres of interconnectedness. It won't be a global economy, it will be some kind of regionalisms in the plural, where countries will seek to integrate with nations which are nearby, and more importantly, potentially reliable partners. Number 4, we've also seen a divided world emerge. For the first time, we see a clear divide between the interests of the West and the interests of the rest. While Europe and North America are united behind Ukraine to such an extent that they are willing to compel their own citizens to suffer 4 months high inflation as a result of the sanctions that they imposed on Russia in order to protect Ukraine. So in that sense, we saw a remarkably cohesive West. But we also saw an Asia and an Africa and a Latin America, which is not that aligned with the West. In fact, while Latin America and Africa have suffered significantly from the food shortages that have been generated as a result of this war and the inflation that has been caused as a result of the sanctions and cutting off of various supplies, but we also have seen Asian nations profit from this war, as India and China have continued to buy Russian oil and Russian gas and Russian energy at discounted prices. And it is quite possible they're also exporting things to Russia. So the trade between Russia and China and Russia and India has definitely spiked. So we see a world quite divided, really, between the West and the rest. Even those nations which are firmly in the US camp, otherwise, strategically speaking, like India or Latin American nations, have clearly shown reluctance to provide wholehearted economic and military support to Ukraine. And so we can see that clearly there is a divided world. And finally, number 5, while most of the world is coming out losers as a result of this war, European economies are all suffering from inflation, so is the US economy, Russian economy is in doldrums. We do see some nations who are coming out winners from this conflict. And I think the 4 major winners in this conflict are India, Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, and Turkey. India, without losing any of its strategic significance, has clearly stood with Russia. It is amazing, refusing to condemn Russian invasion, continuing to buy Russian oil at discounted prices. The Indian foreign minister says that this is in our interest. It would be unethical for him not to pursue this opportunity which advances the interests of the Indian population. Whereas the West is forcing the Africans to starve to protect Ukraine, they could not do this with India. So India has come out without in terms of undermining its strategic significance, but definitely gaining. It has also sent a signal to Russia that it is an old friend of Russia and will remain so even in this difficult time for Russia. So India has come out a winner, I think, at the moment in this conflict. Saudi Arabia too, which was already a pariah state. President Biden had promised to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state, but then he went to Saudi Arabia to bend the knee to the crown prince and bring Saudi Arabia back into the fold of strategic partners with the US. So for Saudi Arabia, this was a great opportunity to recover from the tremendous publicity debacle that it had experienced as a result of the brutal killing of the journalist Khashoggi. And so Saudi Arabia also has benefited from this war. Kazakhstan, which is like the Ukraine of Central Asia, has also benefited because in spite of its dependence on Russia for economic relations and security relations, it has managed to stand independent of Russia in the international forum and has gained tremendous respect. But nevertheless, I think Kazakhstan has become diplomatically significant as a result of its independent foreign policy. And Turkey. Turkey was also going the same route as Saudi Arabia. The questions were being asked: is Turkey a friend or an enemy or a frenemy? There were people in the US who were discussing if there are ways to expel nations from NATO. And so Turkey was seen as more of a problematic state rather than an ally and a partner. But at the beginning of this war, Turkey has not only supported Ukraine and fulfilled its obligations to NATO, but has also played the role of a peacemaker, especially on the issue of making sure that Ukrainian wheat reaches Africa and other nations. So in some ways, Turkey has salvaged its image. So I think that these are the 5 most important. There are other patterns that are emerging about the futility of military warfare, the inability of superpowers to defeat weak nations, as we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, now in Ukraine. There are many other patterns emerging, but these 5 patterns are the ones that I think are the most significant that I see emerging in this 6 months of Russia's war with Ukraine. There's also another point that I want to leave you with, is that it's quite possible that there is already fatigue for the Ukraine war in Western countries as US moves towards the midterm elections, which are very critical. That is in November. It's quite possible that in the United States, Ukraine will not dominate the media. It is already not the most important news item. So it's quite possible that with the decline of attention in the media for Ukraine, it may not serve the interest of Ukraine in the long run to continue to prolong this war, because it is quite possible that a severe winter and dwindling interest may also reduce Western commitment and support for Ukraine. So I hope you find these thoughtful. If you are not a subscriber of Khanversations, do subscribe to Khanversations, share this video with your friends, and if you are a professor, try to use it in your classroom. This is Muqtedar Khan. Until next time, see you.